What up, friends and fellow bears? It's Nihilo back with you, of course, with the Shadowlands 9.0 bear guide. I am actually really fucking excited to be doing this. I'm playing mage and bear for Shadowlands, mainly because I don't want to raid as Boomy. It's kind of weird right now. I still like it, and I still love Pharaoh, and I, of course, still love bear. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. But it was time to mix it up a little bit there, try something new, while still enjoying all my bear goodness, especially coming into 9.0, because bear is, wouldn't you fucking know it, the tankiest boy in the game right now. Don't you just love to hear it? The only downside to it, and I just want to be upfront about everything, is the damage output is not that high. It's kind of on par with all the other tanks besides Demon Hunter. That could change at any time here coming within the next week or two also while they're tuning through the raid and all of this. But regardless, optimizing your gear and just playing well is definitely what you want to be aiming to do. Regardless of that, it's not something that should be there in the back of your mind. Like you lose threat on a pack or a mob or two and you're just like, man, if only Blizzard, if only I did more, if only whatever. It's just like, it's useless thoughts, things you don't need to be allowing to take up space in your brain, especially while tanking. And going into the new X pack, everything is new, so the best thing you can do for yourself is to just practice to build up that confidence in your gameplay so that all of your attention can be directed to what's happening in front of you, which is already a good habit to be in for M+. If you haven't been playing bear before now, it's a part of why I like bear. It's not too intricate. The skill cap for doing higher keys, it's not really like that high, because when it comes to a point where that shit's actually gonna matter, what you know about the mobs and the bosses that you're fighting and how you're going to do your pulls and all of this, it's much more from just experience and just doing everything you can to expand your knowledge base, because that's the information that you're going to need once things actually begin to matter. And that's mainly what this guide is going to be about. Yes, we'll be talking about talents and conduits and covenant shit and all of that, but none of those other choices you make are going to matter all that much if you don't know what the hell you're doing and if you don't have a solid foundation to build from. So without further ado, let's just hop right into talents. Not going to vary too much from what you were using during BFA, minus a couple talent choices just being more valuable now than they were before, and the dungeons being a bit more direct as far as what the kind of pulls are throughout the whole dungeon and just how the profiles of things are laid out. So starting with the first row, Brambles and Blood Frenzy. Brambles, of course, you're going to be using this out in the world doing questing while you're level, doing easier dungeons, heroic farming in the first couple weeks. Anything easier like that, Brambles is great for. Like once you're geared and just blasting through 15s, it's pretty much my default once I'm geared and I know what I'm doing, and if I'm in a group of people and I know things aren't going to be going too awry, I will use it for more damage. But otherwise, the safe play is always Blood Frenzy, lots and lots of rage, especially during Incarn and Berserk. Berserk being baseline now, and then the talent just increasing the effects of it and being what Incarn was during BFA, plus the changes and all that they added to it, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But then we go down to the level 25 row, and Renewal is going to be, I'm probably never going to take it off. Wild Charge is okay, but in an environment where I would actually use it, like maybe a raid, there usually aren't too many interrupts happening. And regardless, you're going to have at least 19 other people in the raid to be able to help you out with kicks, to be able to use your Skull Bash as a small charge. I've been doing this for a long time. A lot of people don't really think about it too much, but Skull Bash, if there's nothing that you're going to need to kick inside of the cooldown of it, I use it for a little charge quite often, especially on boss fights. And then going down to the level 30 row, all the talents are going to be used. Feral Affinity more so in raid for the potential of off-tank DPS with Convoke and Heart of the Wild and things like that. And Balance Affinity has an interesting interaction with one of the Legos that we'll talk about later. But in general, for Mythic Plus, I'll be staying with Restoration Affinity. Ysera's Gift is back up to 3% instead of 1.5, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's honestly pretty massive. Once you get your Barkskin Lego and you're pounding things out, regen's really going to overshadow all of your other healing just because of the amount of throughput that regen is going to have once you have the Lego made. It's pretty wild, and is also part of the reason why I don't use the regen conduit that triggers when you get below 40%, but we'll talk about that also. Moving on to the level 35 row, Mighty Bash is going to be definitely the choice I take in keys pretty much all the time. Mass Entangle will again have its niche uses, some of which I haven't really seen too much use for in keys, but as we do more and more knowledge and more metas develop for all the dungeons and the raid fights, obviously I'm sure there will be some use for this, but generally not going to be taken as a tank. And as I just said, Heart of the Wild won't be using it in keys, I don't think, unless it comes down to a point where there are boss fights where the healing required is just insane and I have a window to pop out and Heart and Convoke without anything hitting me, which isn't really that often. Maybe the last boss in Plaguefall, when she's casting her vomit shit from the ceiling, you would potentially have the option there to pop out Heart, Convoke, and just bomb your party with massive heals. And even without Heart, you know, especially for those of you who are doing keys throughout BFA and or have been on my stream, the amount of times that I hop out of Bear to heal my party, mostly in an emergency, but it's more about being efficient, would be a good word for it, was quite often. The only trick with getting out of Bear to heal your party is just being very aware of what's happening around you, what the mechanics of the mobs are that you're around, if any, knowing the boss fights pretty well to know, okay, there's a window coming up, or once he casts this, I can hop out and I can help heal, or whatever it may be. On bursting weeks, I'll definitely pop out after a pull is done. Since Swiftmend consumes a hot now, Wild Growth Swiftmend on your healer should generally be the play on a bursting week, especially on pulls where you have higher stacks. There's no reason that you shouldn't be helping to heal through bursting weeks. Yes, it's more work, but if you're not too used to doing this, I recommend getting used to it, especially before a bursting week comes, so you're not trying to weirdly make this work when you're not really that used to it. As the better you get with it, the better your pacing will be through keys, and the more efficient your group will be as a whole, because your healer's not sitting there having to do quite everything. And I'm not saying be out of Bear half the fucking time healing your party and trying to hold threat and tank and all that dumb shit. I'm just saying, as opportunities arise, or as you learn things where, oh man, I could have helped to heal that, or this looks heavy, I'm not in really any danger right now, I'm gonna pop out and throw a heal on my healer or Wild Growth my party and then hop back into Bear real quick. Small changes like this and just being aware of what's happening around you, again, will just further help you get better at this. Anyways, I digress. Mighty Bash is really fucking good and is what you're going to be wearing in M+ most, if not all the time. And to the level 40 row, Incarnation is fucking huge now. Same for Berserk. They both now will also be reducing the cost of your Iron Furs by half and reducing the cooldown of your Frenzied Region by 75%, which means using Berserk is a great opportunity to either burn extra regens during the window, which you generally don't want to do because Thrash is extremely valuable, especially if you're not talented into Incarn. Every global you spend during Berserk is very important, and you really don't want to be wasting globals on healing if you really don't need to be, but don't be shy with them. Surviving is obviously more important than doing damage. Just be mindful that inside of Berserk, your globals are much more important. And I mean, you're pumping out Iron Furs anyway during this, like literally pumping them out, especially while using Blood Frenzy. You are kind of unkillable as long as you're not being extremely silly. And then GG, they did buff Moonfire damage by a little bit, if you didn't happen to see, and it is definitely noticeable. There are dungeons like Theater of Pain, maybe Plaguefall, and a handful of others that I will be playing GG in. More so because of the larger pulls, it's kind of hard to squeeze them in about half, if not a little more, of the dungeons right now. But the Moonfire damage that you gain from this is pretty substantial and is definitely a talent you're going to want to be taking. The dungeon specifically where I'll be playing Incarn, at least at this moment, Incarn is going to be really good in Necrotic Wake, Halls of Atonement, maybe Plaguefall depending on the affixes. It'll be good kind of everywhere regardless, but it's just more about min-maxing at that point. And some of the dungeons like Miss, where for half the dungeon you're kind of forced into fight one pack at a time, over and over, to the point where you're generally going to be getting more value out of GG than you will out of Incarn, either due to the packs dying too quickly or because of the way the pulls are scripted. Again, like in Mist, there's just really no reason for you to be taking Incarn, at least initially, because you're just not really going to take a lot of damage from like 4 to 5 things beating on you. Half of them are casting things half the time anyway, or like doing some animation or jumping on somebody doing any one of the many fucking annoying things that they have in the dungeons now. So just keep this in mind as you're going through. Both talents are very good. Soul of the Forest, not really going to be taken for M+, maybe in raid, but even then I still personally think GG's kind of better, especially with the buff to Moonfire. So use at your own discretion, and if you continue to have more questions about what and where to use these, feel free to swing by the stream anytime, and I'll give you my most updated take on them and help keep y'all in the loop. Otherwise, it's never a bad idea to check logs. I'll be logging all the keys that I do and uploading them at the end of every night to Warcraft logs, so make sure you're keeping an eye on those. And now to the level 45 row. Survival of the Fittest is PogChamp with the Barkskin and the Legendary. Earthwarden is still good and will probably see use in raid, but outside of that, in M+, Survival of the Fittest is the play. It brings Survival Instincts down to a 2-minute cooldown from a 3-minute, because one small fact people aren't paying attention to is that Instincts and Barkskin both got baseline buffs to their cooldowns going from BFA into Shadowlands. Right now, currently, in BFA, Instincts is a 4-minute recharge base, and in Shadowlands, it's 3 minutes. And Barkskin and BFA is 90 seconds, and in Shadowlands, it's 1 minute. So huge buffs to both of those cooldowns. I'm surprised more people didn't talk about that. With Survival of the Fittest, Instincts comes down to a 2-minute recharge, and Barkskin down to a 40-second cooldown, to which is increased further with the Barkskin Conduit, which I'll show you here in a minute, that at its base reduces the cooldown of Barkskin by 10%, which currently has my Barkskin at a 36-second cooldown on a 30% damage reduction, that when I press it, I get an Iron Fur and a regen on me, and when it ends, I get another Iron Fur and a regen. So it's kind of like you're starting off at 33% uptime on Barkskin regardless, if you're just pressing it off cooldown, which is kind of insane, especially for being a 30% DR with the Legendary. So yeah, that's nuts, and Survival will be the play for most keys in M+. We'll have to see more of the fleshed out damage profiles and higher keys to see if and when Earthwarden may still be of a lot of value. The reason it's slightly lower value than Survival right at this moment going into the X-Pack is because the damage profiles of what mobs and bosses are doing in the dungeons, white damage seems to be down a little bit incoming on you, and ability and magic damage has been, I don't want to say buff because it's new content, but is more impactful. And the white damage that you're taking regardless, most of the time you're going to have Barkskin up, or you're going to have Berserker Incarn, or you're going to have your tanking Trinket to pop and absorb, or you're going to have Convoke to pump out a bunch of Iron Furs on yourself, or in emergencies or on planned large pulls, Instincts is only a 2-minute recharge, which means you don't need to be shy with that. Use that shit. Don't overuse it, blowing your load all on one pull and then not really having a whole lot for the next. But regardless, even if you do, you're pretty much always going to have a Barkskin in your back pocket that is infinitely stronger than it was during BFA because of the Legendary. And then finally, the level 50 row, Rend and Tear is still the best choice for M+. The increase of damage done and the damage reduction is fantastic and will continue to be so. Tooth and Claw will see use in raid, mostly for pure damage output. You're not really going to use it too much for the DR because it is such a short window. Pulverize could be used on prog if you're really getting fucked up by a boss. I will be raid tanking much more this X-Pack, at least in this first patch, because Boomy's just not really my thing at the moment with the changes I made to it, and I still really enjoy Pharaoh, but only in M+. I'm not a big fan of being a melee in raid. So yeah, again, I will be screwing around with everything in raid and uploading my logs as well, and will be here for any questions you have regarding that. But that is it for the talents. So moving on to Legendaries. So as I've already been talking about, the Barkskin Lego is fantastic. You can craft it on a helm or hands for increased item level, especially if you're being smart about your crafting and your gathering, and or just your buying. Me personally, I'm going to be focusing on one Lego on my mains until it's more comfortable to have others, because Baron Mage just have two that are just kind of exponentially stronger than the others in M+, which is more my focus. So I will be crafting the Barkskin one first, most likely on the helm, just because of the eye level that I'll be able to get on it. And most of the gear that I want for Bear, there's a decent amount of haste verse gear in the dungeons for Guardian, which is what you're going to want to be aiming for stats. Main stat, verse, just being the most important thing. It's just item level and verse, and then if it doesn't have that on it, then look for another piece that you could get. And so those will be the slots that you'll just want to optimize more immediately, as main stat does have a pretty good amount of value going into this X-Pack. And it's a part of why I'll be PvPing a lot more, because all the PvP gear is main stat verse, which is pretty amazing for tanking. So kind of don't want to be forced into PvP, but hopefully I'll be able to enjoy it. I'm sure I will. So anyways, the other Legos Ursox Fury Remembered is a good one, and it'll be good for easier content. You can use the same kind of logic here like you would with the thought process between Brambles and Blood Frenzy. Good in content that you overgear and or it's just easier, but will not overcome the survivability that Natural Orders will give you with the buff to Barkskin. Next up is my personal favorite, even though the Barkskin one is amazing. The Luffa Infused Embrace is pretty dope and is the main reason why I really can't wait to be able to wear 2 Legos if and when we will, assuming it'll be kind of like Legion where 9.1, 9.2, they're going to introduce a thing where we'll be able to wear 2. Hopefully 9.1 so we don't have to wait too long. But the 20% more damage and 30% increased radius is obviously huge, and then the additional stack and the 20% more damage does also affect the Thrash bleed and makes it pretty chunky. So I really like this one, and will probably be the second or third Lego I make, because I do want to make the Drought of Deep Focus for raiding. I'm pretty sure it's going to be more damage, at least that's what the sim seems to be pointing to right now. That could always change, but currently Deep Focus is what I'll be using in raid, unless the Barkskin one becomes necessary depending on the encounter. But anyways, Luffa is my favorite one. I won't be using it too much, but I really love this one. Next up, Legacy of the Sleeper. I tried to send them feedback, man, about this. It's so cool, but it's not going to see use that often in M+ because of the comparison to the Barkskin one. I tried to get them to push the cooldown reduction up to a minute, not just 30, because I feel like a 2-minute Incarn would make this Lego pretty fucking worth, and just having to play a bit more carefully outside of the larger pools where you've got gaps in your cooldowns. But this Lego would have been amazing if it took a minute off of Incarn and Berserk, but that extra 30 seconds, believe it or not, just kind of breaks it for me, to be honest. It's not a bad one, and like could maybe see use in raid. I'm not too familiar with all the fights yet, but any fight where ads come out and just need to be nuked insta, having this for Incarn and or Berserk would be just huge, because again, like the Ursox Fury, while Incarn and Berserk are up, you're already kind of immune, and this just making the amount of burst damage you'll be able to put out even better, and you just won't die. So this could see use in raid, but won't be one of the legendaries that I'll be making early on, especially because, as I said, I'm aiming to get the Barkskin one to the highest item level possible as soon as possible. So, and as I mentioned before, the Draft of Deep Focus, this one I do want to use in raid, I'm pretty sure right now. The damage that you'll be able to get off of this on a proper enough fight where you're actually able to cat weave, it's part of why I'm kind of excited about raid tanking in 9.0, is just being able to have this in Heart of the Wild and Convoke, and being able to actually cat weave and maybe feel impactful, I think would be fucking awesome. So we'll see how that actually pans out. As I said, it'll probably be the second Lego I make, just for whatever raid group I'm able to get into on my Druid. I'm not sure if I'll be doing the alt raids on my Druid, or if I might be able to find another team to raid on or something, but we will see. And the last one I'll kind of mention is Lycara's Oath of the Elder Druid. It's okay. Like, it's good to just add more tankiness onto yourself, and will be a pretty good pairing with Natural Order's Will for high keys once we're able to wear 2 Legos, but that's a big TBD on that. But the Mimi one that I'll talk about is Lycara's Fleeting Glimpse. Screwing around with this with balance affinity and popping your Starfalls and then being able to convoke in Boomy as you're able to, like, there are already times now where I'm just kind of normally, especially at the first boss in Miss, where she stuns the guy and he takes 200% more damage, so I'll pop in a cat form and convoke and just do a pretty good amount of damage. But the main potential with Lycara's is pretty out there, so enjoy that if and when you're able to make that Lego. Enjoy doing your big Starfall damage as a fucking bear. It's so weird, but it's fun, so whatever. And all the other Legos are just kind of not really worth talking about right now. Vitality Sacrifice is okay, but again, just isn't better than the Barkskin Lego. And Echo of Aeonar has some potential for like easier content, maybe in raid, but I don't know about y'all, but I don't know. With the way that crafting Legos is going to be and how it's going to be a little bit of time before you're able to have like 3 to 4 up to the max item level, just because of the amount of soul ash that is required for that, I'm just going to be staying focused on the ones that I need for M plus and raid, and those first two are just going to be the most important to me. And then moving on for things that could be good for PvP or for things I want to meme around with. But definitely I recommend just try to stay focused on one and then just have the next one you want to make in the back of your mind, so you're kind of thinking of when you'll be able to make that. Anyways, with that being on the table, talking about the locations of the drops of these real quick. The Barkskin Lego, the most important one, drops from Huntsman Altimore in Castle Nathria. So yes, unfortunately for those of you who are not the biggest fans of raiding, you are going to at least, I'm assuming it'll drop on normal. I don't know about LFR, but I haven't done LFR in fucking ages, because heck that. But getting into a normal group and clearing the raid there shouldn't prove to be too much of a challenge. The fights don't seem too complicated from what I raid tested on the beta, but the upside of that is you only have to get it once. So just get that shit, get that Lego, and then start pumping keys, dude. The other one that I'll be making later on, maybe third, the extra thrash damage and the 30% increased range. The Luffa Embrace drops from the first boss in the Sanguine Depths. And then the one that I'll be making for raid, I'm pretty sure, is the Deep Focus Drought. Is going to be a minute till I have that anyway, because it's from... The only info that I have on it is that it's rewarded from a quest from your weekly chest, so probably like some of the base essences that you got during BFA, combining items maybe that you get from 2 to 3 weeks of chests, and then being able to have that. Or if it's just a choice, I'm not 100% sure yet, but that's where that comes from. And the other is, it's just too many to talk about here right now. So Wowhead is a great resource to be able to find where the Legos drop from, what they can be dropped from as far as the difficulties of things go. But it's also worth noting that most of them are in the adventure guide. So on the raid drops and the dungeon drops and the PvP vendor, you can find all that in game to be able to find that easily. Same for most of your conduits and things. So moving on to conduits. So I'm personally playing Night Fae just because it's also going to translate well over to Feral and Boomy when I eventually start screwing around with it more. But Night Fae is my preference at this moment. More specifically, Kurain, because of the first ability that you unlock with him, the Wild Hunt Tactics. Your damage to targets above 75% health and healing to targets below 35% health is increased by 10%. You're more so using this for the 10% more damage to targets at full health. This is great for the beginning of every pull. Is really going to help you grab that snap threat and just help you hold on to everything, and just lends more to the concept of, especially during Berserk and Incarn windows, your globals are very important, and knowing what you're going to be pressing and when, and kind of thinking a little bit ahead for that just becomes more important now with the way the game is playing. On to my first potency conduit for him. The unchecked aggression for the extra haste during Incarn and Berserk is fucking bis as far as the potency conduits go. I've been screwing around with the Convoke conduit here and there, as it is kind of interesting in harder content, as Convoke does have a defensive component to it, to where the less health you have, the more defensive spells it will cast, and then the higher health you are, the more it'll prio damaging abilities. So as long as you're kind of playing with that in mind, it can be good, but generally unchecked aggression is just going to be bis in that slot. Soul shape increases the movement speed of allies, don't really care. This is a finesse conduit that I've been playing with for right now. Front of the pack, I think it's pretty fucking good. Born of the Wilds to get reduced cooldown on bash and entanglement and shit, like, it's okay, and I'm sure there will be some places that'll be good, but especially in dungeons where you're doing any kind of skips with invis or a rogue or whatever, the extra time on Stampeding Roar, even a few extra seconds, can prove to be invaluable. So that's been my choice for the finesse conduit up to now. And then we go down to my first endurance conduit, which is regrowth and frenzied regen healing is increased by, at item level 200, it's 16.8%. I believe the conduits that we're getting in this first tier go up to like 223, 226. We'll be able to get at least like 18 to 19% more, maybe 20, which out of the conduits that are available, some people still like the well-honed instincts to proc a regen when you dip below 40% health with a kind of small cooldown on it, but I definitely think innate resolve is the way to go for one of your endurance conduits. It's really fucking good, especially with the amount of regens that you'll be pumping out on yourself once you get the Barkskin Lego. This conduit becomes BIS for your endurance slots. And then after that, of course, the toughest bark conduits for the reduced cooldown on your Barkskin to lend into the gameplay of survival of the fittest and to just keep steadily increasing the uptime on your Barkskin and at least the availability of it. The higher item level you get, this conduit. So unchecked aggression, front of the pack, innate resolve, and toughest bark are going to be the conduits that I'm rolling with, at least initially. So keeping an eye on where they all drop throughout the dungeons and the raid, and also making sure that you're doing your daily emissaries and all that shit, because they can give higher item level endurance and finesse conduits. I'm not sure about potency. I haven't seen them in there yet, but also your world quests can have them as well. So on the initial grind to build up your library of conduits and start increasing the item level of the more important ones that you want, besides just doing the nonsense with the Venari and the Maw, keeping an eye on the rogue quests and just knowing where they come from and what you want to aim for is very important. And then to finish off Kurain and just to make him an extra special badass is First Strike. Damaging an enemy before they damage you increases your chance to crit by 25% for 5 seconds. Now, I wish that this would just translate into dodge. I memed a little bit and put in a bug report saying, hey, the crit from First Strike, I'm not getting any dodge from this. Can you fix this? Knowing that quick reflexes or whatever the hell it's called to give you increased dodge from your crit chance, it specifically says from your gear, and our conduits technically gear. Like, how does this work? So I put in a couple bug reports and I'll probably continue to do so even after it goes live to see if I can get this changed, because obviously that would be like fucking dope. You just walk into a pool, you're critting everything, you're doing more damage to it, you're dodging everything, you're popping bark skin, and you're healing anyway and pumping out iron furs. And Bear's in a nutty place, dude. I'm gonna tell y'all, it's very fun. And being as tanky as we are at the beginning of the X-Pack like this, as long as they don't nerf us into the fucking ground, which they better fucking not, because there'll be riots in the streets and I'll be the one there starting them. Let me just enjoy an X-Pack. Sons of bitches. Anyways, First Strikes is fucking dope. More so Kurain it's a combination of everything in here. It's First Strike and the Wild Hunt tactics for the 10% more damage. Kurain is going to be my boy. But unluckily enough, he is unlocked later in your Covenant campaign, which means you won't have access to him immediately. I'm not quite sure when we'll have access to him. Hopefully not more than like a few weeks in. That'd be really nice. If the shit that I really want to play with isn't time gated to some ridiculous amount, but we will see. But in the meantime, Naya is not bad. The Grove Invigoration. So the attack power that you get from... It's 400 mastery that you get when you use Convoke, and I feel like it translated into like a couple hundred attack power, if not close to that, when I use this. And it's for 30 seconds, and you get the increased healing effects in yourself to everything but regen. You don't get extra healing from your mastery from your own regen. They changed that during Legion, when they nerfed mastery to make it damn near useless, and kind of still is to this day. But in this amount, it's not bad. It's a decent attack power gain and will push you into wanting to use Convoke, preferably earlier if you're going to use it on a trash pull, and the same for on a boss fight. The earlier you can use Convoke, the better, to make sure that you're getting the full value of having the extra 16% health and 400 mastery. So just keep that in mind while you are playing Convoke with Naya. And then we kind of go down the tree in the same way, playing with innate resolve, front of the pack, toughest bark, and then unchecked aggression. More noteworthy for Naya is the poison ability that she has. So your interrupt supply of poison, it deals a little bit of damage over a long ass time, but if you interrupt them again with the initial poison poison on them that you put from your first interrupt, it will end up doing a decent amount of damage as long as you're staying on top of this. So coordinating interrupts, especially with maybe others in your party that might be playing Naya as well, which if they're playing Night Fae, they're probably playing Naya at the beginning because you just don't have another choice. Like Dreamweaver's okay, and I think will be unlocked pretty early, but I kind of prefer Naya. Seeing as how tanky we are, we can kind of focus more on our damage, and you should be wherever you can. So initially I'll be playing with Naya, and coordinating interrupts just obviously becomes more important, especially if you're in comms. Make sure you're communicating with your party. Now, speaking more to the other covenants, Necrolord seems like it'll be fine in raid. If it actually does end up pulling ahead, I mean, I might screw around with it, but I feel like Night Fae is a safe choice, especially for someone like me who plays multiple druid specs pretty often. I don't heal too much, but I do play Boomy and Feral, so having a covenant that's good for all of them and not just having one that's like really good for one spec, but then in the other specs I just like don't really know what the hell to do with it, which is kind of how they seem right now for druid. I personally will be playing Night Fae. Play whatever you want. What's more important are the conduits that you are placing into your gear and the legendary that you're wearing, so make your own choice there. And just know that there really isn't a clear best. So whatever's going to make your gameplay in life just more enjoyable is what you should do for that. And last but certainly not least, of course, we're going to talk about some trinkets real quick. My favorite trinket in the game right now is a Stone Legion Heraldry from the Stone Legion Generals in Castle Nathria. Just flat agility and flat verse, and then the more people in your party that are wearing this, you get 5% more verse for each Stone Legionnaire in your party. So there's a decent enough chance that this will become a meta trinket for full groups, kind of like how Vita was, to where the more people in your party that wore it, just the better it was, and your group was just a bit more efficient as far as the amount of damage that they were putting out. So I definitely recommend trying to grab one of these as early as you can, even on like an off-spec roll or whatever. If this drops and nobody else in your raid wants it, I would probably just try to get one regardless, because I really like it right now, and as I said, a decent enough chance that the longer this first patch goes on, the more valuable it will be, especially if your whole party is wearing one in higher keys. Moving on to the blood spattered scale. This trinket drops from Hakar, I think, in the other side, and is pretty amazing. The absorb that it gets is fucking huge and is increased by up to 5 enemies hit, because it is capped at 5 for the damage and the absorption increase, but it's still amazing. You pop this at the beginning of a pull, and it not only helps you with getting a little bit more snap aggro, but just kind of make sure you're not going to be taking any damage for a hot minute at the beginning of a pull. And then you follow it up with a bark skin, and you're just the tanky boy. The two other trinkets that I kind of like right now, pretty much all the trinkets, like trinkets are trinkets, man. You want to get whatever you can early on if they're doing a little bit amount of damage, whatever. Stat 6 are great. So just once you get past the initial hump, those two trinkets are my two favorites right now. And the Phial of Putrefaction is another one that wouldn't be a bad one to grab, especially for raid. Just adds extra damage under your melee abilities and will end up doing a decent amount of damage, especially on single target. So I will definitely be trying to get this one for raid. There's a handful of defensive trinkets around too that just are okay. There's a lot of trinkets in the game that are just like okay. The only other one I'll mention is the Mistcaller's Ocarina. Drops from Mistcaller and Mist Eternal Scythe. Last I played with this, the uptime on this was fucking insane. As long as you keep playing it every 5 minutes, which is honestly really annoying, the uptime on it is substantial, like the proc itself. So definitely a trinket worth grabbing, especially early on. And the higher item level you can get that, just make sure you're keeping one of these in your bags, as you'll probably want to pair it with Stone Legion once you get into like easier content, or you just outgear whatever you're doing. It's kind of it for trinkets. The rest are like okay. There's a whole bunch of them in the game right now. Is a lot of the dungeons drop a lot of trinkets. The tanking one from Plaguefall, like the organ, shitty. There's a lot of ones that are just like meh. Those 4 would be the most important ones. So moving to the more important part of this guide, and what I said I wanted to focus on more was the gameplay, as having a core foundation on how your playing your spec and getting involved in everything with the new content and the new dungeons, having solid gameplay is the most important thing that you could be doing for yourself, because you don't want to be trying to think too much about what you're doing, especially while learning new content, as these things just compound, and then before you know it, you're dead on the floor and you don't even know what happened, and you're like, I was pressing buttons, but I just, I fucking died. So one of the core staples, and is probably the most common user error while playing Bear, is thrash, 3 swipes, thrash, 3 swipes. No matter how much haste you have, if you are using your globals as perfectly as you can, you will always be getting 3 swipes in between your thrashes. And it's very important right now while making sure that you are generating threat on everything, because currently swipe is target capped at 5 and is a hard 5, which I personally think is very dumb. I think if they were going to do anything to it, they could have given it like the Thunderclap treatment or any of the other numerous abilities in the game that are like they're hard cap for their initial damage, and then it turns into a soft cap once you get beyond 5 targets. So it's like swipe deals normal damage to 5 targets and then just still hits everything around you, just does less damage, which is what would have made sense numerically. Like there's really no point for swipe to be target capped as a tank. Like it's just not good gameplay, and I pushed as hard as I could on this to try to like emphasize this point of why is this like this, but this seems to be the way that they want it for now, so I'm just gonna keep telling them that they're wrong and hope that it changes at some point in the future. Lending back to my earlier point, every global you use, especially during Berserk and Incarn, is very, very important. And when you're on AoE, really, you do not ever want to be casting a single target ability unless it's an emergency for a prio target, or you're really just trying to get threat on that motherfucker. But if you are AoEing as you should be exclusively on any kind of a multi-mob pull, threat shouldn't prove to be too much of an issue. But as soon as you start using mangles or trying to maul or do some kind of weird shit, you're going to start to lose threat anyway, and it's just not going to be a fun time. And I'm sure some of you have experienced this, as this is one of the most common answers that I've given to people that were having trouble with threat during BFA. People come into the stream and they're like, man, you have no threat issues. And I'm like, do you see that screen on the top of my meters? Do you see me trying to single target when I've got 3 or more targets? No, you do not. I am thrashing and I am swiping unless, as I said, there's a very important prio target or whatever that this needs to be burned down, or any kind of bolstering week or things like that. It's fine, obviously, after you have threat, but AoE on AoE. And then once you get down to 2 targets, you can start playing the mangle, squeezing them all here and there game. But anything 3 targets and beyond, AoE is your best friend. Swipe has no cooldown. Use that shit. Keep threat on those mobs. The next thing I'll talk about, which relates to the Barkskin Legendary, is getting used to, it's not the end of the world if you overlap a Barkskin region by like 1 second at the most. This is something I'm kind of still adjusting to as well, is thinking of Barkskin as not only a cooldown but a heal, because it does pop a regen immediately, as well as the Iron First stack as soon as you use that. There's no delay there. On the same note of kind of being mindful of this, means you can also use your regens more often, which means either pulling more things or just doing whatever kind of more dangerous pull more often, because of all this extra healing that you have. Plus, with the effect of Barkskin being as strong as it is now with the Lego, it's wild the amount of healing that you're putting out. I think the last meter I looked at, regen it did like 65% of my healing, like at least. It's kind of insane. And then let's talk about Convoke for a second. Convoke is interesting. It kind of surprises me that I still like it as much as I do, but it is kind of one of the coolest abilities in the game. Generally, on an AoE pull, when you press Convoke, you're going to get at least like 2-3 thrashes out of it, and at that or more if you're chilling at high health for the entire duration of the cast. You're also always going to get like 2-3 Iron First stacks, and then the abilities that it casts, the trend I've seen is the less mobs you have, the more single target abilities it will cast. The more mobs you have, which probably means the more damage you're taking anyway, which means you're not going to be just chilling at full through a full Convoke channel, is that it's going to be using healing abilities, thrashing, and iron furring on larger pulls where you might use it. On a smaller pull or a boss, it's going to prio abilities like Moonfire, Rake. I've seen Pulverize go out, which is not on the tooltip, but apparently if you use this on on only a couple targets or one, you do have the chance to pop a Pulverize on there, which is pretty cool for the extra damage from the ability itself, and the DR stays on there for the full normal duration of a Pulverize. So seeing as it's a talent you don't really use that much, it's kind of neat to see it pop out here and there from your Covenant ability. So just keep that in mind. When you use this ability is probably the most important factor. And at the beginning of the X-Pack, at least for the first couple of weeks where you're playing with Naya until you get Karain, you definitely want to be trying to use it earlier in polls or a boss fight, as you want to make sure that you're going to be getting the full benefit of the 400 mastery and the 16% health gain. And before I forget, the last thing that I will mention, something that you guys need to fucking do, some of you guys, if you are not already using a lot of keybinds, I recommend you get used to it. We've been having some talks about that in the Discord. The more into Druid you want to get, the more important having a fuck ton of keybinds becomes. And tying into keybinds are mouse over macros, which I highly, highly, highly recommend that you take 2 minutes and do this for yourself. You need to put it on your remove corruption, your dispel for curses and poisons, as you will be using that and can still use it in bear. So make sure you are helping your healer out and just your party in general with this. I will post my mouse over macros down below, probably in the comments, so it's a bit easier to find. But having mouse over for this is essential, because CBA having to target a party member every time I want to dispel them when I could keep attacking whatever I'm attacking, mouse over, use my dispel, and just keep doing whatever the hell I'm doing. And the same goes for the mouse overs on your other heals. Regen, Regrowth, Wild Growth, and Swift Mend. Make these mouse over macros. Don't even wait, just do it right now. Just pause the video, hop down in the comments, take the macros, and just put them in your game right now before you forget, so they're just there. Having your heals and your dispel and your B-res on a mouse over macro, if you haven't already been doing this, it is pretty game changing, especially for those of us like me who don't really heal very often. And as a healer, having all of those on mouse over and a bunch of macros and things, that's already things that most of them are doing, but it's not a trend that a lot of tanks and DPS follow, just because it's not some shit that you have to deal with that much. But you are a druid, you have all these abilities, you have a lot of utility for your group, and the more you're taking advantage of this and using the strengths of your spec, the more successful you will be. And one last side note for that, an @cursor macro for your Ursula's Vortex, which means when you press your Vortex, it goes wherever your mouse is. I do not play the game where I have to I hit the button, I get the circle, I kind of want to min-max where I put it, and it's just like, no man, you generally know where you want that shit, and if you happen to miss one mob or whatever, it's generally not going to be the end of the world unless it's a necrotic week or something, which is not that often. And obviously because I'm dumb and I have to remember, having a mouse over macro for Soothe, dude, it's just one more thing. You don't have to think about targeting the mob or doing anything weird. As long as you don't have a million things around you, then it can get kind of messy. Then maybe having an extra keybind that's just a hard Soothe is a good idea. Oh my god, and yes, there is one last thing I'll talk about. Jesus, man. So having a focus kick macro, as you can see in the footage that I have here, Shift R is my Skull Bash on my focus, and then F3, which is the third button on my Razor Naga Trinity with the 12 button attachment on it. That's my number 3, is to set my focus, and then Shift R is to kick my focus, and then 1 on my keyboard is just my normal kick. I play 1 through 6 just because I got kind of big hands. A lot of people don't, but I mean, it's very comfortable for me. And then everything else is just on my mouse, or shift modified to my mouse, or shift modifiers on my keyboard. And anyways, before I continue to talk your ear off and remember things that I fucking forgot, I think we're gonna call it here. Build yourself a solid foundation to come from as you bring yourself into the new content. I wish you all the best of luck with all your loots and your keys and your raid and all this. Good luck with your grinds, boys. I'll be here for you. I'll be streaming hard. I know I haven't been here for a couple weeks. I needed a break, man. Swing by the streams, either here on YouTube or on Twitch, depending on what happens throughout this year. I'm here for you on YouTube, and I'm here for you on Twitch for anything you may need. Don't be shy. Come by, hang out, say hi. Hang out with the fucking Thick Bear gang. And yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching. Drop a like, drop a sub if you want to see more bear stuff, and probably some maid stuff as we go through the content here. I'm just going to be posting up everything I do. do. Like, I'm just going to be posting up bear keys, mage keys, bear raid stuff. I am in love with bear as much as I ever have been, if not more. It's going to be fucking dope. So y'all have fun. Thanks again, and I will see you very soon.